Hey there, Mike Mooney201 here again. Last week's video about logging PIC time got some attention, so thought I'd do a follow-up this week about logging instrument time. Some interesting quirks in the logging exemptions in the FARs. Bring up a few points that, again, you might not have thought of or realized. There's a few provisions that would allow a non-instrument rated pilot to log actual instrument time, and also these can be beneficial to an instrument pilot to log instrument time, although once instrument rated, I'm not sure that you really need an instrument time for any further ratings or purposes, but they would also allow you to log that instrument time as well. But most notably, the time that you kind of care about those hours, logging as much time as possible, is when applying for an instrument rating. You have to have time either in simulated instrument or actual instrument time, totaling 40 hours. So in order to log that much time, every little bit helps, every little bit counts. So two ways that non-instrument rated pilot could be logging not simulated but actual instrument time are quite interesting. So first we need to start by looking at FAR part 61.51 about pilot logbooks, and particularly section G about logging instrument time. A person may log instrument time only for that time, only that flight time, when the person operates the aircraft solely by reference to the instruments under actual or simulated instrument flight conditions. Now, of course, the simulated flight conditions, you grab a safety pilot or an instructor, put on some foggles, get out there and log. We all know about that one. But what about logging instrument time under actual instrument flight conditions? Now, 61.51G does not specify that you have to have an instrument rating in order to log instrument time. Now, in Part 91, it does state that you have to have an instrument rating in order to file an instrument flight plan and in order to fly under weather conditions below VFR. So in other words, to fly IFR, you have to have an instrument rating, naturally. However, it does not say that you have to have an instrument rating in order to log actual instrument time. So for this reason, there's a few ways that a non-instrument rated pilot could be logging actual instrument time. The first one comes from a FAA letter of interpretation that says Pilot B can log PIC flight time for the portion of flight during which Pilot B was the sole manipulator of the controls, even though Pilot B does not hold an instrument rating. In addition, Pilot B can log actual instrument time for the portion of flight during which Pilot B was the sole manipulator of the controls. And they're going to say that 61.51G states a person may log instrument time only for that flight time that the person operates the aircraft solely by reference to instruments under actual or simulated flight conditions. So in other words, if you're with an instructor or even just another pilot, if the other pilot is acting as PIC, they have an instrument rating, they have the complex ratings, whatever is required to be PIC the aircraft, they can just as well fly by themselves, fly that whole flight by themselves, they're fully qualified. And you can potentially have just a private pilot with no other endorsements, not a complex rating, not an instrument rating. And if that other pilot is acting as PIC and you are sole manipulator of the controls, no hood, just you're flying the actual clouds, you're in the clouds, you're flying even instrument approaches in actual conditions, all that time that you're in actual instrument conditions, all the time you're in IMC, you can log that instrument time that you are handling the controls by reference to instruments. So that's the first way that a non-instrument rated pilot can be logging some instrument time in actual conditions. Now, the second way is a little bit more curious, and this comes to a letter of interpretation from the FAA back in 1984, asked about, is it possible to have actual instrument conditions that are not instrument meteorological conditions? The answer is definitely yes. There are times when it might be totally VMC, visual meteorological conditions, where the flight visibility, it meets VFR requirements, like let's say for example at below 10,000 feet in Class E, 500 feet below, 1,000 above clouds, and 3-mile visibility, and 2,000 to the side of clouds. So as long as you are in that, not in clouds, and maintain the proper distance and you have the right visibility, that is VMC. However, there are some cases, they're quite rare, but some particular cases in which you might be in actual instrument conditions and still be in VMC and not be in IMC. Therefore, no instrument rating is required to fly in those conditions, but flying by sole reference to the flight instruments is required. And I've encountered a few of these over the years, and I've logged them as actual instrument time, so thought I'd share them with you. I'm pretty sure most of them have been after I've gotten my instrument rating, so it's more of just out of a curiosity rather than an actual necessity to log that time. But I think there was maybe just a couple instances where I've logged some actual instrument time before applying for an instrument rating, and those really came down to flying in conditions where there's no distinct horizon and you have to stick to the instruments, usually only for brief periods of time. Now, just because it's legal, just because you could log this, does not necessarily mean you should put yourself in those conditions. It's hard to think of cases where a non-instrument rated pilot should be flying in those actual instrument conditions. But say, again, you have another pilot on board that's qualified, or you're very experienced at instrument flying, or you accidentally end up in these conditions, there are some cases where you could be able to log them. So the FAA letter of interpretation said that actual instrument flight conditions occur when some outside conditions may make it necessary for the pilot to use the aircraft instruments in order to maintain adequate control over the aircraft. Typically, these conditions involve adverse weather conditions. It says typically, it doesn't say that they always do. So the example given was a moonless night over the ocean. If you can't see the ground and you can't see the sky, and you can't see the horizon, good luck keeping the airplane right side up. That's the same as flying in clouds. You have to fly by sole reference to the instruments. And therefore, the FAA ruled that yes, that actually would count as actual instrument time, and you can log that as actual instrument time. However, because it's VMC, you can maintain separation from other aircraft. There can be an airplane 10 miles away with their lights on and the sky's completely clear. You'd be able to see it, but you don't have a horizon, so you have to fly by reference to instruments. So that makes sense. It makes sense because the VFR rules are primarily about keeping you separated from other traffic rather than helping you keep the airplane right side up. Instrument flight rules are not just about flying by instruments, they are about maintaining separation from other aircraft by flying in the IFR system. So a few more situations that I ended up in. I think before even having my instrument rating, I was flying my Mooney across Dover Bay, and it's only about 3-5 miles across, not a very long distance, but there was a low layer of fog over the water. I was above the fog, couldn't really see the water, and the visibility aloft was maybe 4 or 5 miles. It was definitely VFR, but not great visibility. I think there was some haze, so you could not see the bank on the other side, and I think there was overcast above. So couldn't see the water below, couldn't see the sky above, couldn't see the other bank. There was no visible horizon. And knowing by weather reports on both sides of the water that it's good VFR on both sides, I knew as soon as I get across it, I'll be all okay. And I already had a bunch of instrument training. I think I was in process of getting the instrument rating, so I elected to go ahead and fly the instruments and get over the bay. And that 5 minutes there or something, whatever it was, counted as actual instrument time because there was no visible horizon, and I logged that as instrument time. Now, another case, it can be at night. So this was a daytime case where just really murky conditions can put you there. Particularly being between cloud layers. You can be VFR, where you have great visibility, and you have ways of getting up and down before and after the clouds. But when you have clouds above and clouds below, and not great visibility going forward, you really could end up in actual instrument conditions. And it's very important, if you're not capable of instrument flight, if you're not proficient at instrument flight, if you don't have the training, if you don't have the skills, or if you haven't done it in a while, don't put yourself in those positions. By all means, I'm not necessarily advocating going and flying these conditions, but just from the theoretical aspect about logging them, especially if you ended up in them inadvertently and you wonder, could I put this in my logbook after the fact? That's what the discussion is about. Another time I ended up logging actual instrument time was flying back from Chicago to New York at night. There was a lot of icing in the clouds, so I had to fly VFR and stay out of the clouds during that flight. It was instrument rated, but couldn't really use my instrument rating to fly in the clouds, so it forced me to fly between layers. There was low layers down below and more layers above, and icing in many of these layers. The layers below were, I guess, broken, occasionally scattered, but they were definitely blocking out view of the ground. And I was crossing over the Appalachian Mountains, pretty sparse populations there. There was no lights on the ground, and there was definitely overcast above, so no moon, no stars, nothing above. Forward visibility was quite good, but because the low clouds were blocking out the ground and the ground lighting was sparse, there was really no lights on the ground either. There was no discernible horizon, completely pitch black. This was probably one of the freakiest times flying. Flying in these black holes is actually far more rattling than flying in clouds. For some reason, flying in clouds or in IMC is a little bit reassuring. You have all this gray around you, so you know you're in a cloud. You know that here you're in a cloud and somewhere else there isn't a cloud, and you'll be out in visuals at some point, even if it's right short of the runway. But being in this black hole, you have no idea where you are. There's nothingness all around you. Nothing above, nothing below, nothing in front. It's pretty freaky to be just so surrounded by blackness, and it forces you to just look at the instruments and fly by reference to the instruments. Now, because you're in VMC, while in actual instrument conditions, it actually puts a double effort on you. It puts the prerogative of traffic separation, looking out the window for traffic, and flying by actual instrument conditions, keeping your eyes inside and out simultaneously. So you end up looking out way more. When you're in instrument meteorological conditions and you can't see anything out the window anyway, and you have traffic separation with ATC, it's much simpler. You just fly the instruments and you don't really even bother looking out. But when you're in VMC, visual meteorological conditions, as well as simultaneously actual instrument conditions, you have to fly the instruments and look out for traffic. Very difficult, very freaky, very unsettling, and don't particularly recommend it. One other time that I recall being in this condition was flying to Cuba. Due to an alternator failure coming into Florida, landing in Pompano Beach, we got delayed. I got my alternator fixed and replaced that same day, but it put us into a late start and night set in before we reached Cuba. So flying over the Atlantic Ocean on a moonless night, pitch darkness in all directions. Nothing below, nothing above, nothing in front. Again, visual meteorological conditions. Granted, I was on an instrument flight plan. I was flying IFR, but it's not flying IFR that determines whether you log instrument time. It's being in actual instrument conditions. So to sum it up, it's not about having an instrument rating or flying IFR or being under instrument flight rules that determines logging instrument time. It's being in actual instrument conditions, which are defined by not being able to fly except by sole reference to the instruments. So hopefully that clarifies things up a little bit for you, makes you realize some situations in which you can log instrument time. Similar to logging PIC time, it's not directly connected with flying IFR or flying in clouds. It's about flying by instruments. So hopefully this distinction clarifies things up a little bit, and thanks for watching. See you next time.